What's the most NSFW thing you saw go down at work? I had a coworker who took massive amounts of substances on busy construction sites, to the point where he would sway and barely keep his balance. The company knew, but they were so desperate for workers that they turned a blind eye and never did anything about it. It was a terrible company that couldn't retain anyone longer than a year, except for this guy. He had many close calls in the sites and somehow never passed away. One day, he just drove off a site in the middle of the day. The company trucks were GPS tracked, so they found him coding in it in a less reputable part of town. What the heck, man? Story 2. I wasn't there, having narrowly left before it happened. A 30-year-old assistant manager at Burger King had a post-closing birthday party at the restaurant. Most of us were high schoolers, aside from her and one or two others. The last 3 people at this party were her and 2 18-year-old guys I knew well. She was in an intimate activity with both of them at the Burger King. She was also engaged at the time. Cameras reportedly captured much of the event. I came in the next morning to the general manager explaining what had happened and that we now had 3 new job openings. Story 3. As a cinema usher at the end of the night, I was waiting for the final films to finish and clear up. One guy was sitting in the back row. He would be standing at the front of the side, watching the credits. This isn't uncommon, but the end credits finished and he was still there. I began to walk up the stairs toward him. He hadn't noticed me and I could make out that he looked like he was asleep. As I got closer, he suddenly looked at me and mouthed something. Another head popped up. Another guy had been engaged in an intimate act with him. I instantly froze, turned around, and walked back down to the exit. They rather sheepishly left a few minutes later. I thanked them for the visit and hoped they enjoyed the movie. No, they enjoyed the movie, all right. Story 4. I worked for U-Haul about 11 years ago, and the location was behind a somewhat disreputable club that frequently changed ownership due to legal issues. I came in one Saturday morning to open, and my manager was late, so I was alone. I got inside, started setting up the showroom, and suddenly heard a loud bang at the front door, which startled me. I looked over and saw a distressed young woman outside, crying and begging me to let her in. I grabbed a moving blanket to cover her and called the police. She was visibly in a mess. It turned out she had been spiked at the club that night and SA'd, then left outside unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she ran to the first place she saw, which was U-Haul. That is terrible. Story 5. I was a bartender working at a popular substance-themed pizza chain in my college town. A guy sat at the bar for about 30 minutes and we talked about music and playing guitar. He seemed like a genuinely nice, cool guy. Then he said, "I'm gonna grab a table and eat now. Good talking to you." He left a solid tip. What he really meant was, "I'm going to go sit in a booth and stare at the table of girls while engaging in private activity under the table." And that's what he did. Luckily, the girls immediately and loudly called him out and we made him leave. We later heard rumors around town of the same thing happening at several other establishments. Story 6. I used to work at a museum and we had a strict no-food policy in the museum galleries. There was an interactive kids exhibit in one of our rooms about nocturnal creatures, which included a little campfire corner with an actual camping tent set up. One day, I was making rounds and suddenly heard a distinct munching sound coming from the tent. It literally sounded like someone was loudly chewing oatmeal in there. Without thinking twice, I popped my head into the tent, ready to say something like, "Excuse me, food items aren't allowed in the..." To my horror, I realized the sound wasn't coming from a kid eating snacks, but from a fully grown couple having intimacy, with a lot of enthusiastic kissing. All I could do was freeze. I happened to look down and the woman was touching the man, seemingly without a care in the world. All of this was happening inside a campfire tent in a kids' nocturnal creatures exhibit. I was too shocked to tell them to leave, so I went to find the nearest maintenance worker. He was an ex-military sergeant in his 60s. He gave them quite a stern lecture. I was in shock the whole time, but highly entertained by his reaction. Story 7. I'm a teacher, and our smart boards are linked to our computers, but you can freeze what's on the board so students can work while you check emails, do registers, etc. One colleague thought he'd frozen the board and proceeded to send intimate emails to his partner during a lesson. He was at least smart enough to use his personal email, but he was careless enough to not check if the board was actually frozen. The result was students photographing the rather scandalous emails and sharing them with each other on Snapchat. I work on a different site, and within 2 hours, the incident was known across my site as well. The individual no longer works for us. Story 8. I worked at McDonald's way back in the day, early 2000s. One of the nighttime janitors was named Frankie. He was from Quebec and had a crude sense of humor, so we got along well. One night shift, I was washing dishes in the back while Frankie changed one of the grease traps. He slipped on the wet floor and dropped the boiling grease all over himself. This happened directly in front of me. Some of the grease even splattered on my cheap vinyl work shoes, ruining them. It was awful. Never heard anyone scream like that in my life. Because it was a grease burn, we had to take off all his clothes so he wouldn't make things worse. I'm pretty sure the 911 operator told us to do this, but it might have been the quick-thinking manager. Anyway, poor Frankie had to wait for paramedics to arrive and treat him. I left a little after midnight. He recovered and eventually became the nighttime manager at a Walmart McDonald's. I used to see him all the time afterward, and he seemed to have recovered well, with no scars on his face, at least. No scars on his face, but scars in his mind. Story 9. Co-workers having intimate encounters on the prep table in the back at a Subway. We were open until 4 a.m. There was one occasion where a coworker brought in speakers, black lights, and strobes, and we basically had a rave. We even made sandwiches with our shirts off that night for customers. Man, I have a lot of stories from that time. My first night on the job there, my coworker had taken substances. She was disoriented with her fingers in the lettuce, swishing them around and staring blankly at it. We made sandwiches around her. Lots of stories about intimate encounters. Once, a random customer I'd never met told my coworker I was attractive, so my coworker sent her to the back and she immediately initiated an intimate act. Zero conversation, just straight to it in the back corner. There were also intimate encounters with coworkers in the back, in the bathroom, and in the refrigerator. We even had intoxicated people offering sandwiches for grass. One of my favorites was the intoxicated guy who, while trying to order, thought there was a wall next to him. So he put his elbow up, leaned over, and held the pose perfectly all the way to the ground before he realized he was falling. There was a schizophrenic guy who would come in all the time and order, talking to the voices in his head, all the while but totally responsive to us, polite and friendly. I kid you not. I ran into him about a year after I stopped working there, halfway across the country, sitting next to me in a park. I looked over at him as he was talking to himself, and my jaw just dropped. I don't know if he thought it was a hallucination or just someone weirded out by his talking to himself, but he barely glanced at me. I couldn't get a word out. I just sat there and looked at him for quite a while, processing it, and walked away. I was closing one night and had lost my apartment keys, so after my shift, I curled up on one of the shelves in the back with a bag of pickle slices as a pillow and slept for a few hours until the opener, my manager, came in. I woke up when the door opened and started to climb out of the shelf, just as she came around the back with all the lights still off and saw a strange form crawling out of the wall. She freaked out, screamed, and just fell down into a heap on the ground. I felt pretty bad about that one, but we laughed about it later. I had one of the best bosses ever through this whole time. Super chill, generous, calm, and friendly. As long as we weren't operating at a loss or getting her into trouble, everything was fine. She didn't care how much free food we ate. As long as we recorded it in the computer for inventory purposes, that job fed me through college. Which freaking state is this, bro? Story 11. This isn't really an NSFW incident, but it's more about a public display of affection issue. At the grocery store where I worked in high school, two of the adult supervisors started a relationship. As I was coming on shift, so was the female supervisor. We met her boyfriend at the time clock as he was clocking out and we were going in. We stopped to say hi and share a kiss for a minute. Just then, the owner's wife, who also worked there for some reason, came around the corner and saw them. She said, "Excuse me, you're both on my time." The male supervisor, who was one of their best workers, looked directly at her and said, "I'm so done with your behavior." The guy walked out and never came back. It was the boldest move I've ever seen. Story 12. I worked in a kitchen at a hotel that had a ballroom for events. We hosted a sorority spring formal, and it became quite lively. There were couples engaged in intimate activity throughout the venue. There was a private set of lockable bathrooms in the hallway by the pool, and we frequently had to ask couples to leave them. One of my coworkers, a Mormon kid who wouldn't even drink caffeine, walked into a closet where a girl was intimately engaged with a guy on the floor. She kept the door closed while maintaining motion as people tried to pry the door open to get them out. People were also being intimate behind the dumpster outside. When I finally left, there was a couple being intimate in the car next to mine. He also hosted father and daughter dances for older teenagers, which was incredibly unusual. Female coworkers informed us that the daughters were enhancing their appearance in the bathrooms. We weren't sure who their intended audience was. The mother or son dances weren't much better. The mothers would rank the sons based on their attractiveness. Oh, and they sold alcohol at both events. Imagine a bunch of older men drinking beer and watching their daughters dance provocatively. Story 13. I worked in custodial services at a university and was on the early morning shift. It was normally quite quiet, around 4:30 a.m. with few people around. One morning, I went to get onto an elevator and there were two people engaged in an intimate activity. There was that awkward moment of us staring at each other as the door stayed open for a few seconds and then closed again. I had a good laugh, then went about my work thinking little of it. Fast forward 3 years. I met this girl and started dating her. After a few months, we ended up going on a camping trip and we were going to meet a few of her friends there. When we arrived at the campsite, there was a second awkward moment as I recognized the couple from the elevator, and they recognized me. When my girlfriend introduced us, the three of us almost simultaneously said, "We've met." When my girlfriend asked when and how we met, we just burst out laughing and ended up telling the story. It's a small world. Story 14. I was interviewing two partners, one male, one female, of a company I was interning for. The man was talking about the history of starting the company and began with, "When we started this company, I was involved with many women, one of whom was my wife, and one of whom is sitting in this room." He then proceeded to go on a tangent about how he was a rather audacious individual in his youth, but had supposedly improved and become a nicer person. He hadn't. The poor female partner looked like she was about to explode. Unfortunately for her, they had definitely been romantically involved when starting the company. She asked me to leave, and then I was called into a meeting a few hours later. He had been thoroughly reprimanded by the female partner. He sheepishly asked me to keep that meeting private and tell no one. Oh well, here I am. Story 15. I used to work at an office or warehouse adjacent to a car workshop that repainted cars, among other things. One day, people in our office started feeling dizzy and nauseated. It turned out the car shop had left the door open, and the fumes had entered our workplace. I was a supervisor at the time, so I simply sent everyone home. Thankfully, no one suffered any long-term effects. The boss was quite upset, saying, "You should have just worked through it." Yeah, thanks for that. I also worked briefly as a personal assistant at a care facility for special needs youth. It was common for residents to expose themselves, even when it wasn't bath time. In that field, however, that's just part of the job. A friend of mine worked with adults with Down syndrome, and apparently that facility was quite uninhibited. The residents there did not like wearing clothes, and intimate interaction seemed to occur frequently. Anytime, any place. Story 16. My coworkers were engaged in intimate activity in the office next to mine. They were very enthusiastic, so much so that the pictures on my wall kept shaking and rattling. The funny thing is, the only person who didn't know was the company's CEO. I found out they were breaking the rules after he saw them being affectionate on an outbound flight to Vegas that he happened to be on. It turned out they both were very, very sick and needed the week off to recuperate. They were both informally dismissed from the company on baggage claim. Story 17. I used to work security at a hospital in South Carolina. We would often have mental health patients in the ER before they were admitted or discharged. One patient in particular had messed himself. This individual, about 5 feet 10 inches tall, was running through the ER. One of our officers, an ex-Marine who was about 5 feet 1 inch tall, think little bulldog energy, picked this person up mid-sprint and brought him to the ground, then dragged him halfway back to his assigned room before realizing he was leaving a trail. Our uniforms were also white polos, and this was in the summertime. The officer was known as the Poop Wrangler for the longest time after that. Man, put some respect on my boy's name. Story 18. I've got 3 experiences that I vividly remember. When I was a janitor, I caught 2 of my coworkers being intimate in the conference table. I just waited by the door with cleaning supplies on hand. After letting them finish, I made them clean up their mess. I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't paid enough. Then, while I was a FedEx contractor, I had a woman at a truck stop make an inappropriate proposition to me. I was making a delivery and she snuck into my truck and waited for me. No thanks. I was on camera. I didn't want to get into more trouble. I got yelled at that evening for not fully securing my truck, as if I would have ever expected that to happen. Last one. Again, while I was a FedEx contractor, I was working my cousin's routes and she was sick at the time. I had a case of alcohol that needed a signature. No problem. I had done this plenty of times. I knocked on the door and this large man answered, barely wearing anything. I think he was expecting my cousin as he went pale. The man even stammered, "You're not my cousin's name." "Oh, you're really messed up now, sir." He got his alcohol, but he also gave him quite a fright. I calmly explained to this person that while I wouldn't do anything permanent, her very large former Marine father would be extremely upset if he found out. I told my cousin about him later. It turns out he had been overly familiar with her for weeks. She never had to deal with his behavior again as she quit about a year afterward. FedEx just has a way of wearing you down, you know? Hey, if any of you are going to play the delivery person game, at least wear your garments, you schmucks. If you know the person and they're comfortable with it, more power to you, but I'm sure most of them don't want to see random parts while on the clock. The job was stressful enough as it was. Story 19. I worked in the dining hall at UW-Madison, and one of the line cooks worked on his 40th birthday. I guess he had a full-on midlife crisis where he came to work intoxicated, became more so on his cigarette breaks, wandered into a dorm lounge and passed out. They woke up and went into random dorm rooms, tried to take a MacBook from a student's desk while other students from that hall watched and told him to leave. Then the police showed up and took him away in embarrassment. He came back the next morning and told the manager, "I'm guessing I'm fired." He never saw that poor fellow again. Story 20. I was almost involved in a very intimate activity with a coworker. We'd been friends with benefits for a few months, and she was a bit unconventional in her preferences. She always wanted to push boundaries. I was recently single when we started, so it was all in good fun to maintain my sanity. We worked at a fast food joint that was open late, and we often closed together. Usually when things quieted down around midnight, we send the rest of the crew home and have 2 people stay late. We were typically on late shift, so we could hang out after work. She wanted to do some things that the health department certainly wouldn't appreciate. I was hesitant and kept saying no, suggesting we just go back to my place or go for a drive or even use the parking lot, but not at work where there were cameras. She said, "You need to clean the freezer. Come with me." Oh no, So I, a teenage male at the time, as active as I could possibly be, still knew that was a dumb idea. What's a guy to do? So I went with her to clean the walk-in freezer, and she immediately became very forward. About 2 minutes went by of just kissing, and finally I put an end to it. I explained that if I were a customer and knew what was going on in that freezer, I'd never order again. I tried to be very reasonable and explain my position, asking if we could pick back up once we closed the store. She freaked out. Apparently, by not engaging in intimate activity with her in a walk-in freezer, it meant I was no longer interested. Good times. Oh, so you were with a psycho. Story 21. A few years ago, the store I worked at was undergoing a massive remodel, and we were expected to continue working around the construction crew and stay out of their way. Well, one of her managers had recently gone through a divorce and had given herself a mommy makeover as a birthday gift, which made her feel quite good about herself. Good enough, apparently, to be repeatedly discovered with a foreman in various secluded spots around the store in compromising situations. She quit the store a few months after that, and the last I heard, she was experiencing a midlife crisis in Vegas. What have you seen at work? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. Well, one time, a friend was working in the drama department at her school, and there was a rumor that 2 female teachers had been intimate in the costume closet. My friend was told to go clean the closet. She put everything away and then, out of curiosity, checked the security cameras. She went back to the time when the rumor started, and it turned out to be true. The 2 drama teachers had been intimate during school hours in the drama costume closet. They even used the dresses she had just hung up to cover themselves. There was also another time where a group of people threw a used feminine hygiene product around the school courtyard and then threw it at teachers' cars and at younger kids. These kinds of stories are just an everyday thing in the UK. Story 23. I'm a teacher. I encountered 2 students engaged in intimate activity. Our auditorium has a lighting room above, and its door is quite well hidden. When you open the door, there's a fairly long staircase to the left that leads to another door, which goes into the lighting room. The theater teacher needed me to grab something up there one day for her, and on the stairs leading to the lighting room, a boy and a girl were intimately involved. When I opened the door, there was a distinct smell, and I turned my head to see them. They were actively engaged. They didn't even hear me open the squeaky door. I didn't know the students, so I just stepped back quietly, closed the door gently, informed the theater teacher, and left the area. I did see the principal and the school resource officer run over to the room. I heard they were either expelled or transferred, but I didn't bother finding out what happened. Story 24. I was not involved in an NSFW situation, but rather a dangerous one. In my teens, I worked for a paint company and a 2-man crew. We drive around to houses and do small paint jobs and such. My buddy drove the truck with all of our paint supplies and equipment in it. One day we just finished a job and lunch and headed into the highway to go home. Like an idiot, I put my cooler box on top of the toolbox in the trailer bed and it flew out of the back of the truck once we got on the highway. I told my buddy to pull the truck over and I got out and played real-life Frogger in 4 lanes of highway traffic. I was able to retrieve the lid from my cooler box, as it was only 1 lane away from the pull-off, but the rest of the cooler was 3 lanes away. Just as I was ready to make another run to grab it, a semi-truck ran over the rest of the box with a loud pop sound, and the thing disintegrated. I had to walk back to the truck with just a lid and shattered expectations. I'm happy I'm still alive, though. Story 25. When I worked at a nightclub in New York City, the owners allowed us to drink for free all the time, during and after work. The owner's friends would often come in to socialize after closing. They frequently offered me substances. They always smoked grass and cigarettes indoors once we were locked up for the night. One of the owners would play really loud Springsteen music while he and his friends threw pint glasses at the wall. He always cleaned up after himself. They all got paid, mostly in cash tips, so we made money every night. A lot of people would play CeeLo, and depending on who was there that night, the pots would get up to $1,000 when a few of us threw all our earnings for the night in at once. The owner would always match the pot. I miss that place so much. Story 26. This might not be NSFW in the typical sense, but I think it counts. I used to work at a banking recruitment firm, a high commission, work hard, play hard kind of environment. It was my first real job. One night after a town hall, basically a monthly presentation followed by drinks at a venue, we all went back to the office for more drinks. Hey, it was a free bar, why not? We were all in the kitchen when I saw my manager, who was the head of sales for all UK offices, pull out a bag of what I recognized as a substance. He then proceeded to use it right there in the office kitchen counter, followed by a few of the other senior consultants. My early 20s self couldn't believe it. And one thing that will always stick with me is the look he gave me before doing it, as if to say, don't tell, which was quite unsettling. Story 27. I work at a hotel, so a lot of unusual things happen. We used to have a regular guest who was retired Special Forces, a really cool guy. He'd come out to the pool with his wife and his support dog all the time, but one day it was just him and the dog. I went over to check on him, and while we were chatting, he said, "Hey man, want to see something cool?" I told him I did, so he pulled out his phone and pointed up to his room on the 7th floor. Watch this. he said as his wife appeared in the window wrapped in a towel. That was a memorable day. Story 28. Once at a small tech company, I'd left for the day and made it out to the parking lot, only to realize I'd left my phone on my desk. I turned around and walked back inside the office, only to hear the unmistakable sounds of encouraging sounds of two people. I made a direct path to my desk, grabbed my phone, and caught a brief glimpse of the owner in a compromising position on a desk with one of the H-1B employees. I was out there quickly. The next day, when she saw me, she gave me a knowing grin and winked at me. It was really awkward with her husband, the co-owner of the company, after that. Story 29. I've got two instances to share, one of which involved me acting a bit unfairly. First, I'd spent all day making a sugar crown for a cake that weekend, meticulously pulling and shaping an intricate design for a party. I set it up on a table in my kitchen, which is a separate building that no one typically enters except to grab laundry near the entrance. I came back the next morning to find the crown smashed. We just installed cameras, so I checked the footage and discovered two of the servants engaged in intimate activity on the table where the crown was placed. They were quite inconsiderate. After letting them finish, I made them clean up their mess. I wasn't being paid enough to do it myself. Second, our supply of Baileys for tiramisu always seemed lower than I remembered. So, on a whim, I poured the Baileys into a jar, filled the bottle with buttermilk and some vanilla, and then waited in the laundry area after I usually left to see if anything was amiss. A new server came in, grabbed the bottle, and took a huge swig before spitting it all over the place. I made him clean it up before I let him go. Story 30. At a friend's workplace, I was waiting outside to pick him up, and he was taking a while, so I called him. He told me to just come inside, saying his boss would be fine with it. He beckoned me into a conference room where his boss was sitting with him and a couple of other employees. There were bottles of spirits on the table and what appeared to be several lines of a substance prepared. The highly intoxicated boss offered me a job on the spot if I drove his car back to his place and tried to hand me his Range Rover keys. It sounds like something out of a wild story, but it was for a call center job, and there was no way I was driving someone else's expensive car with no insurance. I declined. The guy was arrested on some serious charges about 2 months after this. Story 31. This is probably going to get buried, but here goes. Work in the automotive industry. Because I work in purchasing, part of the job involves finding and vetting new suppliers. So I was asking to check out a new, to us, metal stamper in China. For people who are unfamiliar, the process involving laying a sheet of metal in a stamping press, then a gigantic press descends to stamp out a shape. The part that drops is several tons itself, and it applies several hundred tons of pressure to create the desired shape. Because of how incredibly dangerous the machines are that do this, there are usually a host of safety measures in place. Everything from lockout or tagout procedures to light curtains that sense whether something that shouldn't be there is in the way of the press. This supplier had none of that. Plus, the way they had their line set up, there were 2 operators at any given press. One person on one side of the press would lay the sheet metal, and another person on the other side of the press would push the button to stamp. These individuals did not have a line of sight with each other, so they had to rely solely on their rhythm, timing, and an occasional shout. I asked the shop foreman about this, pointing out how dangerous their operation appeared to be. He responded by saying, "No, don't worry. We have tons of people lined up to take these jobs, so when someone gets hurt, we can fill the spots very fast. You don't need to worry about us having to stop production." Needless to say, we chose to go to a different direction with our business. Story 32. I work as a pharmacy intern in a hospital. Sometimes, during late shifts, this means I wander all over the hospital to deliver medication. Last December, I was restocking a machine in the same-day surgery late, around 8 p.m. Same-day surgery typically operates only during business hours, so I didn't expect anyone to be up there. The doors were all locked and the lights were off. As I walked over to the machine, a loud vacuuming noise started, and I noticed one of the operating rooms had its lights on. I finished restocking and peeked in on my way out. A guy in full PPE was standing in the corner, using the surgical suction device in a very unusual way. He made eye contact with me and just kept going. I reacted much like the dad of Malcolm in the Middle, speed walking out of there and just hoping he didn't recognize me. Story 33. I used to work at a printing company in the design or pre-press department. I left for the evening after saying goodnight to a couple of people still in the office. Halfway home, I realized I had left my wallet in my desk drawer, so I headed back. After retrieving my wallet from my desk, I noticed the lights were still on in the print room. I looked through the small window in the door that separated the rooms. Ray, the head printer, had the boss's daughter in a compromising position over one of the printing presses. Ray saw me looking through the window, gave me a big smile, and without missing a beat, gave me a double thumbs up. Should have given him a double thumbs up back. Story 34. I work in a hat store 1 or 2 days a week as a side gig. For some reason, I could never get the weird schedule app to open on my computer, so I would just walk an extra block from my gym to work every week to grab a paper copy. One day I walked in to be pulled aside by the manager because the HR department, previously the manager, was intoxicated in the bathroom, having another employee help take suggestive photos to send to a different manager with whom they were having an affair, both engaged to other people. I ended up doing 2 hours of unpaid babysitting. and the following months were exhaustingly unprofessional and frustrating. Other notable experiences include a manager from a different store possibly transmitting a disease to 2 employees in my store, but only informing one of them. I was definitely one of them. It was curable, but I wasn't the one he told. A lot of alcohol was involved. Being asked by the manager to explain racism to them. I'm white and was not part of the HR department. The manager threatening me over their ex flirting with me. Constantly being pressured to drink, even on shift, despite not being a big drinker or good at handling sales transactions while intoxicated. I ended up having a major confrontation with the district manager because of the affair's complications. How do I convince my husband to be polyamorous? Was not a question I was prepared to answer, and you can't really go to HR about their own affair. I was then told to quit and claim I made it up or be fired. It was a really fun workplace until it became too unrestrained and unprofessional. Story 35. I worked at a local pizza chain that was quite flexible. As long as the job got done and we were making money, everyone there seemed to be using some kind of substance. We would regularly share and sell among ourselves. If you got through a particularly hard rush, we would all go into the walk-in cooler, quickly drink a beer, and celebrate. Most people there had substances on them. That kind of environment. I think if we're going literally with not safe for work, it was probably the time that 6 of us stayed on the back patio using substances until 4 a.m. when a police officer walked up on us. If he had arrested us, the restaurant couldn't have opened the next day, which is quite amusing to think about. Usually, we would use some substances or smoke some before moving on to a bar. But this particular substance was so potent that we were sitting there talking away until 4 in the morning, and half of us had to be back at 9 a.m. to open. Wild times. Story 36. I worked for a large bank as a lead teller. One of my direct reports, a teller, was consistently struggling with her cash drawer and was often out of balance, a fact known throughout our branch. One day, she was scheduled for PTO in the afternoon, so she was balancing her drawer during her lunch rush to prepare to leave. She was short by $25, which required me, as the lead teller, to count behind her to help find the shortage. There was a long line of customers, and rather than help by taking customers, this teller decided to sit under her teller station until the line went down and I could assist. She was wearing a dress with no garments that day. This is a 50-year-old woman. So when I walked over to her station, she tried to get up, and I saw everything. I don't think she cared. It was like a 4 out of 10 on the awkward scale. Story 37. I worked for a massive Fortune 150 multinational medical device company. In 2013, our site's IT department installed iPads in the lobby with interesting slideshows showcasing procedural solutions to accompany their product displays. One of the iPads was connected to a 72-inch TV mounted on the wall. One day, we were hosting an international regulatory organization for an on-site audit of our quality system and design files for products sold in their country. The representatives were moving around the room, looking through the slideshows, when suddenly, across the room, one of the women loudly gasped and dropped her Snapple bottle, shattered it on the floor. About 35 to 40 people turned around to see a photo displayed in the 72-inch TV showing 2 large Johnsons. It was simultaneously incredibly humorous and mortifying. It turned out, one of the IT guys owned and operated a website and was sometimes taking company hardware home for a side business. He forgot to wipe this particular device. It was immediately fired. Story 38. I used to work for a very small company that manufactured hearing devices. Because the company was so small, we allowed local people who had bought one of our products to stop into our office to meet in person with customer service if they needed help. One day, an elderly man stopped in to get help with his hearing device. A representative helped him out and he started chatting with our general manager. He ended up staying for a few hours, just chatting. He was very polite, but seemed lonely, so the GM sat and talked with him. He eventually left, and about an hour later, we started getting phone calls. The man had gone home and started calling every number he could find for a company while he was engaging in a private act. The poor customer service representatives received multiple calls of sounds associated with this act before our IT department was able to block the man's number. It was one of the most memorable days I experienced at that company. It was surprising how normal the man had seemed in person. Story 39. A coworker. She was quite a mess, leaving sharps hanging off the bench, almost causing a fire in the lab once, nearly flooding it another time, and even exposing me to radiation on one occasion. I had to go to the lab one weekend to get some work done. One of the technicians was on the far side of the bench. He looked up, panicked, and started trying to wave me off. I thought he was saying hi, so I said, "Hey, just coming to check on my..." And she then stood up, blushing. I backed away slowly and gave them a few minutes. Story 40. I used to work at a dive bar in my 20s. It was near a university, but since we didn't serve underage, the clientele was limited to late nights. The management meant well, but the location presented some unique challenges. We always started carting folks at 9:30 p.m. after dinner, just to ensure we didn't have any college kids come in and get us into trouble. We actually gave people $10 if they reported someone with a fake ID, but that's another tale. Well, one night, maybe around 12:30 a.m., this rather disaster of a woman showed up. She appeared visibly intoxicated, though on what is unknown had decided she wanted to visit our establishment. The bouncer politely asked for her ID, to which she replied, "I ain't got no damn ID." The bouncer remained polite and tried to explain that we could not let her in without identification. She then exclaimed, "Well, are my gray hairs enough?" Then proceeded to whiz in her entrance. I was amazed to see the bouncer's composure as he calmly stated, "That's not a valid form of identification." She then huffed, went to turn to leave, slipped in her own mess, and fell. She later tried to sue for damages. Story 41. I've got a couple of stories. I used to work in a movie theater when I was young. We had the Disney re-release of The Little Mermaid playing at 11 in the morning. Nobody was in the first showing except one 40-year-old guy sitting in the back. I went to do a theater check, count people versus tickets sold, and caught him engaging in a private act in the back. I called up to the booth with my radio and we stopped the movie and turned on the lights. The guy got up and ran out the emergency exit by the screen. A year or two later, I was working in a video rental store. I'm old. It was a slow night. Just the manager, me, and this innocent, naive girl. I headed to the office to look for something, and my boss was sitting at his desk in just his garments. My suspicion was he was waiting for her to randomly come in. He got really annoyed and told me to get out. Come Friday, we were supposed to get paid after he came back from the manager's meeting with the checks. The district manager called us and asked us where Michael was. Yes, that's his real name. Forget him. They grabbed our checks and ditched in the meeting and just disappeared for 2 weeks. His wife called, looking for him. I told her about the incident. She said she thought he flew to Florida to meet up with a girl he met online. I'm talking AOL chat rooms. 2 weeks later, I was opening after being newly promoted, and I went to the office to find Michael asleep on the floor. I called the police and the district manager, and off to jail he went for check fraud. Story 42. This isn't a bad story at all, but I'll always remember it. I used to work at a country club as a banquet server, bartender and valet, among other roles. I was valeting one night, just waiting for a party to end. There was a small birthday party going on in one of our rooms. Standing by the door, I watched as two middle-aged women helped an elderly lady, maybe in her 80s, down the stairs. I didn't think anything of it until I noticed she was extremely intoxicated. Like, completely incoherent, similar to a college student who's had too much. She wasn't acting belligerent or badly, just incredibly intoxicated. They sat her down so she could wait for a ride, as she was obviously not going to drive. It turned out she never really drank, but this was a special event, and she had enjoyed a lot of wine and a great time. Everyone was kind of laughing about it. Her ride arrived, and she was helped off the bench and went home. I then noticed a smell and discoloration on the bench. The poor lady had whizzed all over the bench and herself. We just tossed the cushion and laughed hysterically about it for weeks. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.